Have you ever found yourself utterly bewildered by a woman's sudden emotional shift? One moment, everything seems perfect. Connection, understanding, harmony. And the next, you're facing a storm of emotions that leaves you completely disoriented, questioning your reality and your sanity. This isn't random. This isn't chaos. This isn't just women being women. What you're experiencing is something far deeper, far more ancient, and far more powerful than most men have ever been allowed to understand. Today, you're about to discover the hidden archetypal forces that Carl Jung, one of history's most profound psychological minds, uncovered about the female psyche. Forces that silently drive women's deepest emotional behaviors, forces that have been operating beneath the surface of human relationships since the dawn of consciousness itself. The pain you feel, that confusion, that sense of betrayal, that feeling that no matter how hard you try, you can never fully grasp what's happening in her mind, stems from a fundamental gap in understanding. A gap that exists because men were never meant to see behind this particular veil. The female unconscious contains shadows, archetypes, and emotional patterns that operate on a level so profound that they often remain hidden, even from women themselves. But today, that changes for you. Through Jung's revolutionary analytical psychology, you're about to gain insight into the primal feminine archetypes and shadow aspects that explain those seemingly irrational emotional patterns, those tests, those shifting moods, and those deep contradictions that have left you feeling lost and powerless in your relationships with women. This isn't about manipulation. This isn't about control. This is about finally seeing the invisible forces that shape your emotional reality and gaining the profound understanding that can transform your experience of love, connection, and intimacy forever. Before we dive deeper, you need to understand what Jung meant by the shadow. The shadow isn't simply darkness, it's everything a person has rejected, repressed, or never acknowledged about themselves. For women, this shadow often contains aspects of themselves that society has deemed unacceptable, inappropriate, or contrary to the feminine ideal. When you witness a woman's behavior suddenly shift, when she becomes cold where she was warm, distant where she was close, critical where she was admiring, you're often witnessing her shadow taking control. Not because she's choosing it, but because unconscious forces have been triggered within her. You see, Jung discovered that the female psyche harbors several powerful unconscious forces that shape behavior in ways that appear completely irrational to the conscious mind, especially the male conscious mind, which operates from a fundamentally different archetypal structure. Imagine this. You're with a woman who seems completely content. You've had wonderful conversations, shared intimate moments, built what feels like a genuine connection. Then, without warning, she begins to test you. She becomes emotionally unavailable. She finds fault where previously she saw only virtue. She pulls away exactly when you've begun to open your heart. This isn't personal. This isn't even fully conscious on her part. What you're experiencing is her shadow, containing all the pain, fear, and protection mechanisms accumulated through her personal history and the collective female experience. Rising to the surface to protect her from perceived threats, her conscious mind hasn't even registered. One of Jung's most powerful insights was the concept of the anima and animus, the feminine aspect within men and the masculine aspect within women. These are unconscious forces that profoundly influence attraction, projection, and relationship dynamics. For you to truly understand a woman's hidden nature, you must first recognize that she carries within her an animus, an inner masculine that shapes her expectations, attractions, and reactions to the men in her life. This animus often contains both idealized visions of masculinity and the darker aspects of masculine energy she has experienced or inherited through collective consciousness. When a woman suddenly seems to expect you to be someone entirely different than who you've shown yourself to be, when she appears to be reacting not to you but to some invisible version of you that exists only in her mind, you're experiencing the projection of her animus onto you. This projection creates a nearly impossible situation. You're being measured against an unconscious ideal that she herself may not even be aware she holds. And when you inevitably fail to match this projection perfectly, as any real human would, her disappointment and withdrawal seem completely disproportionate to the actual situation. What's happening in these moments is a profound archetypal dance. Her animus is seeking recognition and integration through her relationship with you, just as your anima, your inner feminine, seeks recognition and integration through your relationship with her. But when these projections remain unconscious, they create patterns of attraction followed by inevitable disappointment that can feel like emotional whiplash. Perhaps the most powerful female archetype in Jung's understanding is the Great Mother, the embodiment of the life-giving, nurturing feminine principle, but also of its devouring, destructive counterpart. This dual nature of the maternal archetype explains one of the most confusing aspects of female emotional behavior: the capacity to be simultaneously nurturing and undermining. You've likely experienced this duality in relationships. A woman who seems to support your growth, encourage your ambitions, and nurture your well-being, while simultaneously engaging in behaviors that subtly sabotage your confidence, question your capabilities, or create emotional dependencies that keep you from fully developing your own strength. This isn't conscious malice. This is the Great Mother archetype operating through her, embodying both the life-giving and the life-taking aspects of the feminine principle. The nurturing aspect wants to see you thrive. The devouring aspect fears your complete independence, as it would render her nurturing unnecessary. When you find yourself in this double bind, being built up and torn down in equal measure, encouraged to grow but punished when you do, you're experiencing the Great Mother archetype in its full, contradictory power. Understanding this contradiction is essential to navigating relationships with women who may be unconsciously embodying this primal feminine energy. Jung and his followers identified key feminine archetypes that represent different aspects and phases of feminine power: the maiden, innocence; potential, new beginnings; the mother, nurturing, creation, abundance; and the crone, wisdom, completion, death, and rebirth. What most men fail to understand is that these archetypes exist simultaneously within every woman, regardless of her age or life stage. The woman in your life contains all three of these archetypal energies, and they may emerge in different contexts or even in rapid succession. The playful, spontaneous quality that attracted you, maiden, might suddenly give way to controlling, nurturing behavior, mother, which might then transform into critical, distancing wisdom, crone, all within the space of hours or even minutes. These shifts aren't manipulative strategies. They're archetypal energies moving through her, often triggered by specific interactions, situations, or even by the phases of her natural cycles. When you learn to recognize these archetypal expressions, what once seemed like emotional chaos begins to reveal itself as a complex but ultimately comprehensible pattern of primal feminine energy. One of Jung's most revolutionary ideas was the collective unconscious, a shared reservoir of experiences, symbols, and archetypal patterns inherited from our ancestors. For women, this collective unconscious carries the accumulated emotional memory of feminine experience throughout human history: vulnerability, objectification, suppression, resilience, and power expressed through indirect means. This inherited emotional memory creates reactions in women that may seem completely disproportionate to current circumstances. A minor disagreement might trigger a defensive response that seems more appropriate to a life-threatening situation. A simple request might be met with resistance that feels more like she's fighting for her fundamental rights than discussing everyday preferences. What you're witnessing in these moments is not just her personal reaction, but the activation of collective female experience stored in her psyche. The weight of historical female vulnerability and the necessity for emotional self-protection is being expressed through her individual response. This is why logical arguments often fail in emotional conflicts with women. You're not actually addressing the real source of the reaction, which may be rooted in archetypal patterns and collective memories far deeper than the immediate situation. Understanding this dimension allows you to respond to the deeper currents rather than just the surface waves of feminine emotional expression. Now we come to the most profound and potentially disturbing revelation about the female psyche that Jung's work illuminates: what some have called the dark feminine, or the shadow aspects of feminine archetypal energy. This is the truth that men were never meant to fully comprehend, partly because it challenges every conventional understanding of female nature. and partly because seeing it clearly requires confronting aspects of the feminine that have been deliberately concealed behind cultural norms, social expectations, and even biological imperatives. The dark feminine embodies the primordial chaotic energy that both creates and destroys, that nurtures and devours, that elevates and undermines. It is Kali, Lilith, Persephone, the aspects of feminine power that patriarchal structures have attempted to suppress, control, or demonize throughout history. What makes this energy so disturbing to the male psyche is not its darkness. Men have their own shadow aspects, but its fundamental incomprehensibility from the male perspective. The dark feminine operates according to emotional and intuitive principles that often appear completely irrational to the more linearly oriented male consciousness. Here is the revelation that changes everything. The behaviors that most confuse and disturb you in your relationships with women, the seemingly arbitrary emotional shifts, the testing, the simultaneous desire for both security and freedom, the attraction to strength combined with the impulse to challenge and undermine that very strength, are expressions of the dark feminine attempting to find balance and integration in a world that has denied its existence. When a woman tests you beyond what seems reasonable, when she creates chaos in otherwise stable situations, when she simultaneously draws you closer and pushes you away, she is unconsciously creating conditions that allow the dark feminine to express itself. She is trying to discover if you can hold space for her complete nature, not just the aspects of femininity that are comfortable, predictable, and socially acceptable. This testing isn't personal, it's archetypal. It's not about your specific qualities or failings. It's about whether the container of your relationship can accommodate the full spectrum of feminine energy, including its chaotic, destructive, and transformative aspects. The greatest paradox, and the truth that Carl Jung understood perhaps better than any man of his time, is that this dark feminine energy is not ultimately destructive to authentic relationship, but essential to it. Relationships that cannot incorporate and honor this energy remain superficial, inauthentic, and ultimately unsatisfying to the feminine soul, which knows itself to be both light and dark, both creative and destructive, both nurturing and devouring. The men who truly succeed in creating profound connections with women are not those who attempt to control, suppress, or fix this energy, but those who develop the psychological and emotional capacity to recognize it, respect it, and relate to it as an essential aspect of feminine wholeness rather than as a problem to be solved. Now that you've glimpsed these profound truths about the female psyche, truths that most men go their entire lives without ever fully comprehending, you stand at a crossroads. You can continue to approach your relationships with women from a place of confusion and frustration, or you can begin the challenging but ultimately transformative process of developing a new relationship to feminine nature in all its complexity. This understanding isn't about giving you techniques to manipulate or control women's emotional responses. Quite the opposite. It's about recognizing that the attempt to control or predict feminine emotional energy is precisely what creates the most painful and confusing dynamics in male-female relationships. Instead, this Jungian perspective offers you something far more valuable, the capacity to witness and relate to feminine emotional patterns with awareness rather than reactivity, with curiosity rather than judgment, with depth rather than superficiality. When you stop taking her emotional shifts personally, when you recognize them as expressions of archetypal energies larger than both of you, you create space for authentic connection that isn't constantly derailed by unconscious projections and reactions. When you develop the capacity to hold steady in the face of the dark feminine, neither controlling nor retreating from its intensity, you become capable of relationships that reach depths most men never experience. This is the wisdom that Carl Jung offered. Not techniques for managing women, but insights that allow men to develop the psychological depth necessary to engage with feminine nature in its full, awesome complexity. As you move forward from this video, I invite you to observe your relationships with new eyes. Notice when archetypal patterns are emerging. Pay attention to when you're experiencing her shadow, when you're being projected upon by her animus, when you're facing the tests of the dark feminine. Not to control these energies, but to understand them, not to predict them. but to relate to them with greater awareness and authenticity. This understanding is the beginning of a journey toward relationships characterized not by power struggles and confusion, but by mutual recognition of the archetypal forces that shape both masculine and feminine experience. If this video has opened new perspectives for you, please hit the like button and share your experiences in the comments below. Have you recognized these patterns in your relationships? How has understanding them changed your approach to connecting with women? Subscribe to our channel for more insights into the depths of human psychology and relationship dynamics, and check out our previous videos exploring other aspects of Carl Jung's revolutionary understanding of the human psyche. Remember, the darkness isn't something to be feared, it's something to be integrated. And in that integration lies the possibility of relationships with women that are more authentic, more passionate, and more profoundly satisfying than you've ever imagined possible.